It's time for Pure Performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Pure Performance. My name is Brian Wilson, and with me, as always, I have my co-host, Andy Grabner. Hey, Andy, how are you doing?
Very good. It's actually a boring intro today because in the last couple of episodes, you really did a good job.
But don't you remember the last intro I started and you thought it was a boring intro, and then I went into my story?
Well, I thought maybe it's because of Lent. I'm not sure if you are.
I used to. I gave up on that nonsense.
You gave up on that, yeah, because maybe you just want to do it.
I gave up Christianity. I gave up religion for Lent 1 year, and then I just forgot. But I had another dream with you, Andy. Remember last time I had the dream that you were kidnapping my kids, and it made me happy. This time you were taking my daughter shopping, and you were like, "Come on, Adele. Let's go shopping." Andy's always Arnold Schwarzenegger when I do his impression. And I was like, "Oh, where are you taking her shopping?" And he goes, "I'm taking her to DSW." And my daughter goes, "Oh, that's designer shoes, right?" So they go there. They're out there for about an hour or two, and then they come back. I'm like, "Oh, what kind of shoes did you get, Adele?" And she's like, "Oh, look at these really cool shoes. They're really tall." And Andy goes, "Yes, they're platform shoes." Get it?
Oh, that is an awesome. It's amazing.
Get it?
You did it. I think that's one of the best openings we ever had, and it's a perfect segue to the topic too, because we want to talk about not platform shoes, but actually platforms that enable engineering organizations to build software products. And today's topic is everything around platform engineering, and we don't want to keep him waiting for much longer. No. Luca is with us today as our guest of honor. Luca, welcome to the show. Sorry to keep you so long, but I thought it was a really great dream story.
Yes. Yeah, it was totally worth it.
totally worth it.
Yeah. Hey, Luca, do us a favor. Introduce yourself to the audience in case they haven't yet come across your name.
Sure. So I'm Luca. I run product at Humantic, and probably better known on Twitter or so as one of the core contributors to the platform engineering community. I help moderating the Slack over there, where we have over 10,000 members. I co-host PlatformCon, which is the #1 platform engineering conference, and I write a newsletter, Platform Weekly, that goes out to about 10,000 people as well every week.
That's cool. So I do hope that you will send out the link to this podcast in your next newsletter, because we can always.
I better. Yeah, I better. Otherwise, I'll be in Brian's next story.
Exactly. You will be in his next nightmare.
Yeah, I guess I should preamble those as nightmares, not dreams, because if Andy's in it, it's like, what's wrong?
Yeah. But Luca, thank you so much for being here. You mentioned a couple of things already, and I want to remind people, if you're listening to this and you want to follow up on some of the content we're discussing, like Luca mentioned PlatformCon, Luca mentioned his newsletters, his Slack. We will put all of the links in the summary. PlatformCon, also just a shout out, it's coming up early June, and I think you have already listed a lot of great speakers up there. So really, thank you so much for hosting this conference and bringing people together that want to talk about platform engineering. Now, the interesting thing, and this brings me to my first question. If I look at platformcon.com, it says the top DevOps and platform engineering leaders on a virtual stage for 2 days, which brings me to my first question. Why do we need platform engineering if we have talked about DevOps so long? What is platform engineering? And because I have a lot of challenges sometimes explaining even what DevOps is, even though I've been trying to explain that to our community for many years. But enlighten us. What is platform engineering for people that have never heard about it? And what is, from your opinion, the difference to DevOps and I think also SRE?
100%. Happy to do so. Let's start with the definition of platform engineering. So platform engineering for me is the art, because it's really more of an art than a science, of sort of like taking all the different tech and tools that you have in an engineering organization today, especially in the enterprise, and bind them together into a golden path that enables developer self-service and reduces sort of the cognitive load on the individual contributor when they interact with their infrastructure. And these different golden paths, the sort of superset of this golden path is what is often referred to as an internal developer platform, or IDP for short, which is the end product that is built by the platform engineering team or platform team. And to understand, and so, people now could be like, all right, great. Why should I care? And how is that different, right? From, everything that I already know around DevOps and so on. And I think to answer that, probably it's best to take a bit of a step back, and kind of understand where DevOps come from. And so if we look at when DevOps came up more than like 10 years ago at this point, even 15 years ago, the word was a very different place then. We mainly developed a monolith, probably running on bare metal. The infrastructure that we were developing on was a lot less complex. You didn't have Kubernetes, infrastructure as code. You didn't have, this crazy CNCF landscape with 10,000 plus tools that nobody really understands. And the initial idea behind DevOps was really simple and a great idea, I think, which was basically to remove the barriers between developers and operations and facilitate collaboration. So I think we can all agree that's great. The issue is the reality of DevOps when you have all these converging trends of, containerization in Kubernetes, infrastructure as code, Terraform, GitOps, and all this other like cloud native toolings and sort of like trends that came together. What that meant for the average engineering organization is that developers now are very overwhelmed just by the sheer amount of tools and scripts and steps that they need to touch in order to do their job. And so while back in the days, if I just wanted to deploy a small change to a front end service, for instance, to test something, I maybe had to touch one script and one tool, one deployment tool. Nowadays, that is oftentimes like a Helm chart here, a YAML file here, another Terraform module over there, 3 tools in between, right? And so this can become quite overwhelming quite quickly. And so the reality of DevOps today is, for a lot of teams, developers being blocked effectively by this cognitive load and by fear of screwing things up, frankly, if they start touching all the scripts and different things. And then operations team basically becoming a bottleneck for the velocity of the organization, because now you have developers effectively, creating tickets for operations and leading to what we call ticket ops. And so you have developers waiting on the one hand, and operations team becoming a bottleneck and being stuck and sort of like fighting to putting out fires all the time on the other. And that's obviously not a great situation. It's not great for sort of all your key DORA metrics. It's not great for overall time to market. And it's also not great, as a work environment, right? Because it can become quite a frustrating experience. You have a lot of friction between developers and operation teams, and it's just not ideal. And so in this, and so if we continue kind of like down the memory lane, or I guess like up, what happened after this was basically you had, leading tech organizations, leading tech companies, and top performing engineering orgs that quickly realized that the initial promise of DevOps, so you build it, you run it, is not really, it doesn't really work at a certain scale, right? so these sort of like Airbnbs and Spotifys and Googles of this world that have to onboard literally hundreds of new developers, sometimes a month, to an increasingly complex cloud native setup, quickly realize, hey, this thing doesn't really scale, right? I cannot expect everybody to understand everything of an increasingly complicated, delivery setup. And so they said, we need to build some sort of platform layer here in between the operation side of things and the application developers to A, enable developer self-service, and B, ensure that the operations could, build a scalable system and enforce, the right policies and all these sort of like enterprise grade functionality that you need at that scale. And that's really kind of, I think, where this sort of like, DevOps started morphing into this discipline of platform engineering. And so all that platform engineering really is, this discipline of binding these tech and tools into this internal developer platform and golden paths for developers to enable developer self-service. And it is really an evolution, if you will, of DevOps that enables true DevOps, enables true you build it, you run it at the enterprise scale in the cloud native era.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I'm taking a lot of notes here, and I have a lot of follow-up questions. Because the first thing you said when you explained the challenge, and I think it came by we as an industry talking a lot about we need to shift everything left, we need to codify everything, so everything is code. But now, in your example, you said, as a developer, I may need to change my code, I need to change my deployment definition, I need to change my infrastructure definition, which means I need to all of a sudden be familiar not only with all these tools, but all the languages, and then I need to figure out how these changes get applied and what happens if something fails. So if I hear you correctly, and just repeating what I learned from you, you said the reason why we needed a different approach to this is because the whole shifting left and everything is code, and we give all the power to the developers or ask them to do, you build it, you run it, became just too complex because it's just not doable. I mean, you may have some engineers that can do it within an organization, but especially as you are onboarding 10, hundreds and thousands of developers over a certain period of time, you cannot assume that everybody knows Terraform inside out, Ansible inside out, Helm inside out, customize it, whatever else there is, right? I think while the movement was great to empower developers, and I think empowerment might be the wrong word, but I think we put too much pressure on the development side to do everything. This needed a new approach of making sure developers can really become efficient and stay efficient, especially as we onboard new teams. And therefore, I like the definition of a golden path. So you have different golden paths, and you provide the golden path through a self-service model. And this is done through providing a platform to your engineers. And yeah, that's what I just took a couple of notes. I also really thought, first of all, confirmation. Did I get it right?
Yeah, spot on.
Yeah. One other thing that I would like to ask Werner Vogel, because he kind of was famous for you build it, you run it, and you say you build it, you run it, doesn't scale. I'm just wondering, back in 2006, I think is when, not 2006, might be too long ago. When did he say?
Yeah, 2006. That's 2006, when he said,
yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's amazing. It's been 18 years, 15 years, 60, whatever. I need to do the math. 17. I wonder how big Amazon was back then. That you
not
build
that big.
Yeah.
I looked it up because I was also thinking about this. And it was like a few hundred developers, actually. It's not that big. And I mean, obviously, the other thing I think is like, obviously was in their interest, right? Because this, they said it when they released AWS, when, the whole idea was like, oh, now you have this AWS console and you can do everything from here. And we all know that quickly stopped becoming true for a lot of developers. And then we started adding all these other cloud native things, and it just got really complex really quickly. And yeah, so I think there's also a question of incentives there.
Yeah. Now, this brings me to my next question, and because it seems it's a size and a scale question. At which time then is it the right time for an organization to think about, do I need a platform engineering team? Do I need to build my own internal platform, or am I still small enough, I don't know, to still run with the you build it, you run it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And as you mentioned, Andy, right? Like you might have sort of like your development team with 10, 15, 20 engineers where everybody's super comfortable handling, their Helm charts and their YAML files and Terraform modules. Then it's fine. Like, you can keep it pretty lean. But as we mentioned, that tends to not scale really well as you add new people, and not everybody understands everything. And specifically, they're not familiar with how you build your own tooling and systems. And so what is that sort of like threshold, right? In our experiences, between like 50 to 100 developers, that's where at 50 is where you start basically seeing things break. And usually you have maybe that like 1, 2, 3 people really specializing in operations who start becoming, who start being put under pressure by the rest of the organization. And that tends to get progressively worse until usually we see sort of like platform initiatives emerge, right? Around that like 50, 100, like 100 plus, really, usually you see platform teams or some sort of like platform initiative emerge. And I think that's the other important thing for engineering executives to realize, which is, if you don't decide to build your platform, it will build itself, right? And so you're much better off sort of, recognize that this is happening and kind of like, tackle it and plan it and really decide on what is the architecture and what are the design principles that we want to follow when we build this platform versus, basically having a homegrown solution that will sort of emerge in a patchwork way because, people realize, okay, we need to build some sort of layer here to enable some degree of self-service, even if it's minimal. And so that is kind of the threshold that we see in the market. And, below that, you could have the, sort of like first case that we just spoke about of, everybody's a pro and maybe they have a really advanced cloud native setup and they're all familiar with all the, tool chain and they can run it on their own. Or the alternative of that would be, a team that just opts for, let's say, a PaaS solution. So, the OG PaaS is kind of like Heroku. Now there are a lot of different other solutions on the market. They're very sort of specialized in different types of use cases. And there's nothing bad with that. Like, I think PaaS solutions are probably a really good option if, if you really want to focus on ultimately sort of like your key value adding activity, right? So if you are a food delivery startup. Maybe that's a bad example because they usually are really well funded and have a lot of employees from the get-go. But if let's say you're like an HR company and you an HR startup, SaaS or something, and you are just starting out and you're like 10 people, like there's no point in you investing resources in building infrastructure because that is not your business. Your business is HR software, not infrastructure software. And so that's what you should focus on and probably opt for a very simple PaaS solution can be a great path forward at the beginning. But it's important to be mindful of that threshold. So the reason why Heroku doesn't work for the enterprise and all these PaaS solutions tend to break past that sort of like 50 to 100 engineers point is that they are just not flexible enough, right? So when you start having different development teams of different, they have different preferences in terms of how they want to interact with the delivery setup and infrastructure, then is where it really becomes important that you have a platform team that listens to them and that builds different types of golden paths that then become your internal developer platform, right? And so that's really the key difference there, is basically having, a external platform team, which would be the product team at your PaaS provider that, is basically trying to optimize for every one of their customers, or a platform team that is really building a product for your organization specifically.
Andy, I wanted to bring up, I bring this point up a lot, Luca, not a lot, but for me, more than once is a lot. This sounds to me a lot like what the goal and mission of Cloud Foundry was, where it was flexible enough that the teams developing on the back end, the platform side, can set up all the rules, set up all the opinionated platforms, right? It wasn't just stuck in one way. Obviously, there's different technologies we're talking about. I know back when they were popular, they weren't supporting, Kubernetes so much at that time. But conceptually, it sounds like a very similar idea that was put forth then, where takes all the burden off the developer to say, hey, you know what, developer, write your code, push it. The rest is done, and that's maintained by best practices created by other teams. Am I getting that right, or is it like I always go back to Cloud Foundry because it's like, oh, look what they were trying to do years ago. It didn't work at the time. It didn't seem like the world was ready, and it wasn't flexible for everything else going on. But we seem to be heading back towards that direction now after going through a full-on, I'm going to build and make bespoke versions of everything. I'm not even going to use one of the regular Kubernetes versions. I'm going to modify it and make it exactly what I want. Right. Now everyone's coming out and saying, wow, this is way too much. I don't want to have to think about that side of it. Is that a proper interpretation, or am I missing a piece of it there?
No, I think it's a really good interpretation. And as you said, I think they were probably a bit too early in the market. And I also think, as you also mentioned, they were still this in between, I think. So, the way I think about platform engineering and kind of like what we advocate for is like, hey, look, platform engineering is an unopinionated toolbox to go and build your own opinionated workflows and platform, right? Yeah. Which is the opposite of a PaaS, which is basically saying, hey, the product team at, PaaS provider X, already have figured out what the minimum common denominator functionality is for the entire market. And here it is with very, little ability to go tweak it, right? And customize it to your own needs. And I think in that spectrum, Cloud Foundry was still like sort of like in the middle, where they weren't simply providing a tool, right, in the toolbox for the platform team to go build. They were still like coming with a baggage of sort of, some opinionated decisions that they had taken sort of like upstream. And I think the combination of those two things, like the market not being fully ready, or having, frankly, like, and what does ready mean, right? Like ready means basically people hadn't experienced the pain yet, really, to the right extent, right? And this is partially a question of scale, really, right? Because you now have engineering organizations that are already much larger on average than just engineering organizations 10 years ago. Like we just talked about, like AWS had only like 500 people. Obviously, most companies didn't scale like AWS, but still, like the average like bank or healthcare institution has probably, 5x like the amount of developers they employ now, right? And at the same time, technologies like Kubernetes have gotten boring, frankly, right? So boring that even the enterprise adopts it now. And then, that problem becomes more and more real of, okay, how do I make my cloud native setups with all these technologies manageable? And so that's where I think like these pain points that platform engineering addresses have become a lot more felt in the last 5 years or so. And that's where and you can really track, right, this trend of Google building Borg and sort of like these leading tech companies building these platforms, and then slowly now in the last really 5 years trickling down to downstream to or mainstream to like larger parts of the market, larger segments of the market. And then you can see the sort of like platform engineering community that we've been sort of like working on in the last couple of years really taking off. Because I think it really hit a nerve with a lot of people that, especially, senior contributors or senior platform builders who had been building these platforms for the last 5 or 10 years, they just didn't really know what it was called or what best practice was. And so it was kind of like a big relief moment, I think, for a lot of them, kind of like, oh, that's what I've been doing. And that's kind of where the sort of, we see that the crazy growth in the community and really just in general, like social and everywhere, there's just a lot of people and analysts talking about it now.
Mm-hmm. A quick recap again for me, what I learned in the last couple of minutes. That means what you were saying is that if you're small, right, start with something that is actually opinionated, because you need to focus on, proving out your business, building a business case and existing platforms that are super generic, but also, let's say that are super opinionated in the way they address the problem. They get you to your first milestone and maybe to a second milestone. But eventually, you need a platform that has your own opinion, right? Because every organization is differently. And then I guess you have two options. You can either say build everything from scratch, do everything yourself, or you're starting obviously with, I think you called it a platform. I'm not sure if I wrote this down correctly, but you said like a platform toolkit that allows you to then build your own opinionated platform, and then really with this allow you to scale to the next level, right? And building the golden paths. It's really interesting, right? We start with like there's a generic opinionated platform that probably helps 80% of organizations in the world, like the classical 80-20 rule. In the beginning, it helps you, but as you outgrow that platform, you obviously need to think about how you build your own platform that works based on your skills, on your business use case, on your processes, on
even your needs.
Yeah,
right. I mean, as you think, Andy, one of the I'll be the one mentioning it this time, is you think one of the original goals of Captain, right, was that different teams are going to need different tools, different platforms, so that you had an easy way to integrate them. And I think what Luca, you're saying is that when you start building your own platform, you can take a look at holistically at the organization and say, okay, what are the golden paths, as you said, at the different sets that we need, the different teams. Not every team is going to work with one workflow. So we can build different sections for each team within limits. Obviously, you're not going to give everybody everything. I guess that's where the platform team is going to come in and help make judgments on that and say what's going to be the best. But then you could build that, maintain it, and then each team can operate in what's going to be the best path for them. Whereas obviously with the past platforms, you just have one choice and that's it, typically, right?
100%. And that's why it's also really important that people, to find that balance, between sort of like build here syndrome and adopting what's already out there. Because even when you are building your platform, right, even when you get to that scale where a pass doesn't make sense, you're already like 60, 70 developers, things start to break, you need to start building your own opinionated workflows and golden paths and so on. You still don't want to reinvent the wheel from scratch, right? You still want to see, okay, what is the best combination of, whether it's open source or commercial tooling out there that I can sort of like, mix and match to build the platform that I need, right? And then the platform team, real value creation then is not in rebuilding 100% of this stack, but doing that last mile optimization, because they're going to be the only ones in the world that really understand the specific requirements of the organization. And so that's where the value really is in building that feedback loop between the platform team and the rest of the org.
In your experience, organizations that have their own platform teams, who is part of that team? Like what is it what is a platform engineer, or what type of skills do you need in a platform engineering team? Does this include, let's say, your DevOps engineers that know the delivery tools well? Does it also include operations? That meaning, does it also include folks that know how to automatically configure, set up, and scale infrastructure? Or how does this? What makes up a good platform engineering team?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think it's important to understand that a platform team does not replace an existing SRE, DevOps, infrastructure team, cloud ops, whatever the name is, right? And the reason is it kind of like goes back to your question, which is what is the skill sets that you need, right? And obviously, yes, you need a solid understanding of your kind of cloud native technologies du jour, right? So Kubernetes, IAC, you need to understand CI/CD workflows, GitOps, whatever. But if you come from that DevOps, SRE, cloud ops background, probably you understand all of this. And so the key kind of mindset shift that needs to happen, I think, is really one around product. So as a platform engineer, it needs to be super clear to you and to everyone else in the organization that developers are your customers and the users of your product, which is the platform. Mm-hmm. And so instead of trying to sort of like, onboard them and teach them infrastructure technologies, you really want to focus on enabling developer self-service. And so your task is to build internal tooling, and really build that feedback loop with developers, right? To listen to them, to listen to what they need, right? And so in that scenario, basically all the topics, all the traditional product management topics that, and key themes that we know from the last 20, 30 years of product management theory apply, right? So user research, product roadmap, MVP, rollouts and adoption, and so on and so forth, right? Mm-hmm. And so you basically, need to build really a product team. So you have your backend, your front end, your QA, and so on, and the product manager becomes a really important key sort of role in that scenario, right? Mm-hmm. Because they become really the link between the product team and the other teams, so the DevOps, SRE, and infrastructure teams, because you still need people that think about, hey, how do I optimize my load balancing across these regions for availability, yada yada, right? That's a separate thing. It's a separate area of focus, but you need a team that is focused in on one mission, which is, hey, we're building a platform as a product, and platform as a product is really one of the sort of like key principles that we advocate for in the community. Mm-hmm. And we build this platform as a product, and we're not here to just like maintain and your infrastructure and optimize it for scalability. We're here to ship a product, which is the IDP. Mm-hmm. And
So the question now is, does the platform as a product team follow the you build, you run it? That means they actually not only build the platform, but also run the platform? Or is the platform run by somebody else? Or do they need another platform to build the platform?
Yeah, you can keep them going forever. The meta platform team. So I think the platform team is responsible for everything, right? It's responsible for like shipping the product and sort of like maintaining the product. And you can really think of it as basically a startup, within, if you will, within the larger engineer organization, right? And so if you think about a startup, it's not just about building a product and putting it out there in the world, right? It's actually about building a go-to-market motion around that product. And this is really the key part, and kind of like what I was getting to, which is it's not just about having that product mindset. It's also about being a really good communicator, because you not only have to build that relationship that really tight feedback loop with developers and the rest of the engineer organization to really listen to them, understand what is the right level of abstraction, right? Because as an example, if you are a senior backend engineer who really enjoys messing around in their YAML files, and now I give you some sort of like ClickOps UI to do your deployments, you're going to be really mad at me. And because you're going to be feeling abstracted away and that you completely lost control over, all the things that you like to tweak normally. At the same time, if you so for that specific persona, you might want to create a really absolutely code-based sort of like golden path that really gives them all the ability of tweaking, hey, how much CPU my Kubernetes, my pod is using, or whatever it is, right? But at the same time, you might have a front-end team that doesn't care whether you're running on GKE or AKS. But in fact, they might not care whether you're running Kubernetes at all, right? And so in that case, like providing a more abstracted sort of developer experience might totally make sense, and in fact might be the best thing, right? And so that's where being able to listen and communicate with the different users of your platform and your different development teams becomes super important. But not only you need to communicate to developers, you also crucially need to communicate to management executives to get full stakeholder buy-in, right? And that is really not an easy task a lot of times. And it's completely different lingo that you need to, get used to and speak, right? Because when you speak to developers, it's about, hey, you don't want to, it's about waiting times really, right? Like you don't want to wait. You don't want to have this like crazy cognitive load on you to just like do something. And so those are kind of your keywords there. When you talk to to management, it's a completely different thing, right? It's about, time to market, lead time is about your kind of also like DORA metrics and stuff like that, right? And so communication becomes an extremely important part of the skill set. And if you were to, I think, like plot on a graph where kind of like on your y-axis you have communication skill from 0 to infinite, and on the x-axis you have time, I think you'd have kind of like your sysadmin and your infrastructure engineer and your, DevOps, cloud ops engineer, and then eventually your platform engineer as, plotted on one line up and to the right? Because over time, you basically, this role, this operations, and then now platform engineer role has to, need to acquire more and more confidence in how they communicate internally, and that becomes really, really important.
I think your example with the front end and the back end developer was really great, and also kind of at least helped me to see kind of at least visually in my mind what you mean with different golden paths. Because basically the platform gives me maybe two options, right? I am a, as I said, senior software developer. I want to code everything in YAML, and the platform is great. It helps me to maybe deploy it out somewhere, but I still have all the control of how I configure my manifest and so. But then on the other golden path could be, I just want to get a simple website out, right? And I don't care where it runs as long as I can access it after the deployment. I think that's good.
And I want to specify one thing, because I mentioned like this like fully code-based workflow in the sort of like senior backend engineer case. It is not that if you want to simplify further, then it just means like a UI. In fact, what we see in the market is usually these like ClickOps solutions that are very UI heavy don't really work very well, because even your front-end engineer, like their workflow is still usually fully Git based, right? In most cases. And so they're still going to hate you if you ask them to basically interrupt that workflow to jump into UI that they don't really understand. And now they need to learn it, right? And so in both cases, actually a fully code-based interaction method, I think, is preferred. And a lot of times can make or break your platform initiatives. Like we've seen a lot of platform teams really focus on kind of the high level functionality of like, oh, let me put like a nice service catalog, i.e. like a backstage or whatever on top, and off you go. And those really tend to fail a lot of times because the service catalog functionality is not where really the pain points is for a lot of developers. The pain points usually are around application configurations and infrastructure orchestration, which comes later. And you're asking them to basically go into this like UI that is not super useful for them, right? And so just to kind of like specify that I think code base is still the way, but within code base you have different levels of context that you can provide to your users.
Andy, that gave me two thoughts. Luca, as soon as you mentioned the UI bit, I remember going back many years ago to WebSphere, and it seemed like the WebSphere maintenance was all through a GUI, right? A UI. You wanted to change back when Appmon days, Andy. You had to add the library, and it would be the operations person would have to go in every single like screen, click, 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 click to get down. Other people running just pure Java, just a couple of keystrokes, and it's in. Like I was like, wow, that seems to be a nightmare. I had another thought that you triggered on there, but I can't remember it now because I went too far into my WebSphere nightmare. But if it comes back,
it'll come to your dreams.
Yeah, it'll come to my dreams.
But from an early adoption.
I got an idea. Yeah, go on, Andy.
Yeah, no, just from an early adoption, right? If you look at tools in the GitHub space these days, Argo, CD, or Flux, at least from my perception, right, and I only see parts of the world, it feels that Argo CD, the reason why it is so popular and it gets adopted quite a bit is because it actually has some UI that visualizes the stuff that's happening. I'm not saying that you configure things there, right, because you configure it still through code, but having some type of visualization is obviously very important because otherwise people don't know what's happening.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I think, but that's the key. What you mentioned is really the key difference, right? Like you want to be able to configure everything in code. And then, obviously visualizing things like a DORA metrics or, a deployment history is a lot easier in a UI because you can just look at it, right? But the important thing is not building instead of a golden path, a golden cage, right? That forces you to have to click around to do things when you're not used to. And that can really kind of prevent adoption of the platform.
So that's a nice new keyword, golden path versus golden cage.
Right.
Look at that. I'm pretty sure you have used this in the past, but I will use this the first time, I think, when I do the summary here. Let's not build golden cage. Yeah, I will definitely credit you for that. Yeah.
So the other thing you said in that, it came back to me, talking about like the senior developers wanting to have full control to tweak and everything. I wonder how much of that is holding on to knowledge and their skill because they know they can trust themselves better than a platform. Whereas when the platform gets to the point where they can trust it, will they be happy to give up that flexibility? So a lot of the points you were talking about was configuration, tweaking, and all this. There's a lot of tools out there. A lot of times we have Akamai out there that talks about, Akamas, tweaking different Java settings to, like, as it's running to optimize. You can have self-remediation. You can have feedback loops that are constantly taking and tweaking, and these things are all getting better and stronger. I'd be curious to see when that gets really solid, when you can push it out there and the automation and, AI or whatever you want to call it can do the tweaking, can optimize the running of it. It'd be interesting to see if those senior type developers will be willing to give up that control to say, yeah, I do trust this runs and this is awesome now because I don't have to think about this. I can just focus on the architecture, all this other kind of stuff, and just get some of my time back, right? Because there is a control, right? I think it's the same kind of control. Like if you're driving yourself versus a self-driving car, if you're a good driver and you're experienced, like, well, I don't know if I want AI to drive for me, right? Because I feel like I have the control. If it gets good enough, will they let go?
And it's fun to drive, right? I totally agree with you. I think that is definitely a sort of like psychological block in some cases, not necessarily a lot of them. But I think, a good selling point for platform engineers in that scenario to their developers, to their senior developers, is so what I call shadow ops, which is another word for you, Andy. And it is basically, the reality of DevOps in a lot of large organizations is, okay, you have ops stuck and they become a bottleneck and everything we already talked about. And what that leads to oftentimes is shadow ops, which is basically your senior contributors, your senior ICs, eventually doing ops for their team. Because they're the most senior ones, they're the ones that understand the Helm charts and the customize and Terraform modules and so on. And so if the more junior, less experienced, less ops knowledgeable people on the team will just slack them and be like, hey, can you just do this for me? Because, ops, otherwise I need a database provision. It's going to take a week. Can you just do it for me? And they're like, yeah, sure once and sure twice and sure three times. And then, at the end time, you're basically becoming the operations team, which, from an organizational perspective is obviously suboptimal because you have your most experienced, most expensive, frankly, resources tied up in doing work that they shouldn't, right? They're not actually shipping features and building applications. And then they, like, for the senior engineer, the experience now sucks twice, right? Because they still need to wait for some stuff on operations. And then they also become operations under pressure. So they just get the worst of both worlds, right? And so I think in that case, there is a really strong pitch from the platform engineer perspective to say, hey, I'm really making your life better along a couple of dimensions here, and so hopefully that can get them through the finish line.
I have one final argument on this discussion. If you say that the platform has to be treated like a product, like every product manager or every product owner, you need to first figure out who's your target audience. And you may have people in your organization that are not your target audience. You don't need to convince 100% of the people to use your product, right? That's also a very important point. Don't try to solve 100% of the problems if it doesn't make sense, maybe.
Totally. And and by the way, like product management is one of the few channels that has been created directly by, PMs in the community, in the Slack space, in the platform engineering Slack space. And it's one of the most active. And because again, it's super interesting. It touches all these different things, not just technical challenges, but also all this like internal marketing and stakeholder buy-in challenges. And you're absolutely right. Like the one of the key questions is what is your rollout strategy? Who do you start with? And what we've seen successful platform initiatives do is usually they start with the more advanced dev teams because they're the ones that are not afraid of, your YAML and Helm charts. And so with them, you can, and usually they're the ones that are also sort of more willing to try new things. And, they're more versed in the cloud native technology world. And so that is a great starting point because it really allows you to figure out, hey, who's my pro user basically, and how can I build that sort of like low level, low abstraction kind of like golden path. And then from there, start onboarding more and more teams and build, higher and higher abstraction layers on top of that.
Cool. Hey, Luca, I think there's still a lot of stuff on my mind that I would like to discuss, but I also know at some point we have to kind of close the curtain on this episode. We have a lot of stuff that we discussed. I tried to do a decent job to take all the new words I learned and all the new stories and write a nice summary and then also link to all the things we've mentioned, right? Starting from PlatformCon, your platform engineering community, obviously your LinkedIn and your Twitter. We also link to Humantic and all the other stuff that you provided in the conversation today. Is there anything as final words that you want to make sure that, in case you didn't get it out yet, that needs to be said?
No, I think we said everything. You mentioned at the beginning PlatformCon. I would encourage, if people want to find out more about platform engineering, platformengineering.org is a great place to start. But yeah, PlatformCon is the main conference on the topic. We did it last year for the first time. It was great. We had 7,000 signups, 6,000 attendees just on day one. And we already have 7,000 signups now. So we're expecting about 15,000 people this year. And it's free and it's virtual. So it's really easy to join for everybody.
Well, there's no good argument against free, right? And especially if you have, I looked at some of your speakers that you have in the lineup. I mean, that's if you have time, and I assume even if people cannot join live, the recordings will be available somehow
on the YouTube. Yeah,
that's all good. Cool.
With one thing, Andy, in the beginning, you were asking the difference between DevOps and platform ops, and I think one of the additional benefits, and this is probably a topic for another day on how it would be done, but you talk about DevOps, right? Then it turned into DevSecOps, then it turned into DevSecBizOps, then it turned into blah, 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 right? All of those are a means of getting workflows, data flows, and everything else into this DevOps thing. And if you think about platform ops, that's all tooling, workflow, transferring data. One word covers it all. So if you want to add, you don't have to get into these awkward DevSecBizOps, right? Platform ops, sure, it fits in. Why not? You could put any other teams in there because they're all part of this ecosystem. And it's really about an ecosystem, I think, right?
Yeah.
So at least from a speaking point of view, makes it a heck of a lot easier to say. I know there's a lot more to it than just the word, right? There's encompasses more. But just in terms of being a speaker and having to say these little acronyms all together, platform ops gets you covered. So that's a bonus for it, and maybe a reason to push towards it some more.
I really like the. I mean, that's a great final thought. I really like the golden path. I think if you think about your organization and you understand who your different teams are that need to ship code, then you should figure out what are the 1, 2, or 3 golden paths for them from inception of an idea until it's in production, and then build a product that enables these engineers to actually get the stuff out there through the golden path. And the golden path obviously includes all of the best practices we have learned over the last 10, 15, 20 years, or even longer since we've been building software.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then every time you build a golden path, you can give everybody a golden ticket and sing the Willy Wonka song.
Exactly.
I've got a golden ticket. All right,
there's a lot of jobs that you can make with golden. There's showers as well.
Oh, jeez. Go there.
That's the next nightmare, or maybe it's not a nightmare for Brian. Yeah?
No.
Exactly.
No.
I just gave you the perfect material for the next one.
Yeah, exactly. Family show, right? All right, Luca, thank you so much. This has been eye-opening. I remember when Andy mentioned this at first, he was like, yeah, I really want to dig into this, and I think it's a great topic. And I didn't know much besides the words and all, so this has been extremely educational for me, as we said in the beginning before we started. So thank you so much. I'm sure our listeners learned a whole bunch as well. And Andy's got some new buzzwords, so that is fantastic. Really appreciate you taking the time, and we'd love to have you back sometime to dive into this more. So hopefully that could be arranged if we didn't offend you too much with our bad humor. And thanks to our listeners. So thanks everyone. Any last words?
Thank you for having me. Would love to be back some other time. This was fun.
Yeah. Also have you back.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.